Hello, I'm Dave Miller. Welcome to a special edition of Think Out Loud. It's a conversation in front of an audience at the Sentinel Hotel with the leading candidates for Oregon governor, the Democratic incumbent John Kitzhaber and his Republican challenger, State Representative Dennis Richardson. We are doing the show today in partnership with the City Club of Portland, and we are broadcasting throughout Oregon on KLCC, on Jefferson Public Radio, and on OPB. We're going to talk about education and taxes, jobs and criminal justice, and competing visions for Oregon's future. Throughout the hour, we're going to be focusing, among other things, on racial equity and what it would take to erase stubborn disparities in everything from graduation rates to poverty. Before we begin, a quick note about the format. It's not a formal debate. We won't have opening statements. We won't have timed answers or rebuttals. One of my jobs is to make sure the candidates have equal time. There will be two-minute closing statements at the end of the hour. The hashtag for this event, if you would like to join the online conversation, it's ORGOV debate. Our website, as always, opb.org/thinkoutloud. Finally, I ask that our audience here at the hotel refrain from applause during the course of the conversation, but please join me right now in welcoming Representative Dennis Richardson and Governor John Kitzhaber. Governor, I'd like to start with the inescapable news of the last day or so. The acknowledgement by Sylvia Hayes, your fiancée and the First Lady of Oregon, that she broke federal law 17 years ago when she took money in exchange for marrying an Ethiopian immigrant so he could get a green card. First of all, what was your response when she told you?
Well, I learned of this 3 days ago, late Tuesday. I was obviously very taken aback by it and hurt. Have some processing to do on that end. But Sylvia made the decision to have a press conference yesterday, which took a lot of courage and was the right thing to do. And I'm very proud of her, and I support her. And this is now a very personal issue, and we just need some time to work through this together.
I understand. Please do, if you can hold off on applause for a full hour, I'd really appreciate it. I understand that in many ways it's a personal issue. It's also a public issue in some ways. If you are reelected, will you keep her on as a policy advisor for clean energy, for economic development?
I don't know. Time will tell.
How will you make that decision?
Well, as I said, we have some work we have to do together on our relationship, and as we work through that and begin to enter the fourth term, should I be fortunate enough to be elected, we'll make that decision based on her ability to contribute to the people of the state of Oregon, based on her many years of experience in clean energy, in fighting for biodiversity, and her deep and abiding passion to help people in poverty find a pathway to prosperity.
If I understand you correctly, though, you're saying that at this point you haven't made the decision that her announcement yesterday disqualifies her, for example, from being an advisor as part of your administration.
Let's be clear about two things. First, these are two completely separate issues. One involves something that she did 17 years ago when she was not a resident of the state of Oregon and I did not know her. The second issue is about the intersection between a modern professional woman and the role of First Lady. And we anticipated that and the dynamics that would create, and we put in place protocols, guidelines, and legal reviews, which we have followed. Now, let me make it clear that I do not agree with the assertions or the conclusions of the Willamette Week, but we welcome whatever scrutiny people want to give. We have not violated the law. We have simply given a modern professional woman an opportunity to continue her career. And in 2014, it seems ludicrous to conclude that a woman who has had a successful career long before she met me and long before she became First Lady should be expected to give up her career and her life's work because she is married, hopefully soon, to a governor.
Representative Richardson, please do refrain from applause.
The governor is correct that there are two separate issues. And on the issue relating to the sham marriage, you know, I feel for the governor. I mean, this is not something that really involves us. It involves Sylvia Hayes and the IRS and the governor. But when it comes down to someone who has direct access to the governor, who then is accused, and there's evidence to indicate that they've used that access for personal gain, that's a violation of statutes. And you can't be the criminal and the perpetrator at the same time. And so I call on the governor to ask for a special prosecutor to investigate this, because he's speaking now as a fiancé, and I certainly understand that. But he's also the governor, and who's going to speak for the people if our governor is speaking as a fiancé? So will we have a prosecutor that will do the investigation and determine if Oregon statutes have been violated? Because if they have, no one is above the law. A first lady, the governor, no one else. She should be treated like any other person who has access to the governor who's been collecting money from those that want something from the government.
So let me make a comment here. First of all, that is an assertion, not a fact. Second of all, the politics of personal destruction have no place in this campaign or in the state of Oregon. Thirdly, it interests me that this is being raised about a woman, Sylvia Hayes, when I recall a first gentleman whose name was Frank Roberts, who not only had access to the governor, lived with the governor, represented a different branch of government, earned a salary, and could easily have influenced the decision of that particular governor. I think there are some people who are really concerned and nervous by strong, successful women in the public arena in 2014, and there it is.
I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
I've got a wife and 8 daughters, all very strong-minded, and I'll have you know that I understand what it's like to deal with strong women. I mean, one of my daughters is a contractor, and for Christmas we got her a hard hat that said, Rachel, homemaker, because she's running a large multi-million-dollar construction project right now. So it's not about that. It's about a pattern of avoiding responsibility for ethical behavior. You have Patricia McCaig, who was an advisor to the governor, and while she's collecting $350,000 from the contractor on the bridge project that never got built. That is an inherent conflict of interest. Now you've got the governor's first lady, his fiancée, Sylvia Hayes, she's doubled or tripled her income in 1 year between 2012 and 2013 by taking contracts and money from contractors or companies that want access to the state. And so we have rules against that. You can't do both. If you want to be a modern woman, that's fine, but you can't be the governor's advisor while you take money from those that want access. That's a violation, if that's what occurred.
Governor, I'd love to get just a direct response to one of the representative's earlier questions. Would you push for a special prosecutor to look into these questions?
The answer is no. First of all, I don't believe that there are anything but assertions and conclusions from an article in the Willamette Week. Secondly, Dave, I'm happy to talk about Sylvia and Patricia McCaig until 1 o'clock. But at some point, it would be nice if we could actually talk about some issues that are important to Oregonians. For example, the fact that 57% of Native American children in this state live in poverty. 42% of African American children live in poverty. So I'm happy to talk about it, but I think it's a disservice to the people of this state not to talk about the real issues that the governor's going to have to deal with.
No,
so
we will be talking about many issues. This was the first time that Oregonians could hear directly from you on this issue that many people had questions about, and I'm glad we could spend a few minutes talking about it. But as you say, there are other things to look into.
Okay, before we leave it,
briefly, please.
Let's make sure that we understand. The governor said, I will not do an investigation on someone who's on my staff who's been alleged to have received money, who's tripled her income, and she has direct access as a senior advisor.
I think both of your positions are very clear to our audience right now, and I think it would be helpful for the audience for us to move on. As I mentioned at the top of the show, one of the overarching issues we're going to be focusing on in the course of this debate is racial equity, big disparities across many aspects of society. I want to start with gentrification, which has greatly affected certain parts of the Portland area, in particular pushing out African Americans from North and Northeast Portland over the last 2 decades or so. First of all, Governor Kitzhaber, is this an issue of concern to a governor?
The answer is, of course. I think the deep disparities and inequities in our society are one of the major concerns certainly have been in my administration and will be in the future. They have ramifications for children who are essentially way behind the curve when they get to kindergarten, disproportionately communities of color, English language learners, kids from generational poverty. If we can't address that issue, and that is really where you get the greatest leverage in terms of addressing the inequities, we're going to be in real trouble. And that's why we have focused so heavily on early learning, on third grade reading, literacy, kindergarten readiness, and full-day kindergarten.
But specifically on the question of gentrification, of people being pushed out through a variety of economic circumstances from what had been traditional neighborhoods, and we needn't get into the long history of how they even became traditional neighborhoods because of various racist policies, but clearly there's an even longer history there. But specifically, when it comes to gentrification, what should a governor do?
You know, this is part of a much larger issue. There's not one policy or decision you can make. You know, I was around in '64, some of you were, that summer when our cities were burning and we were rioting, and it breaks my heart to stand here 50 years later and watch what's going on in Ferguson, Missouri, and to know that we have elected an African-American president and have made so little progress dealing with the deep disparities and inequities in our society that something like that could happen in the United States of America in 2014. So we have to change ourselves. We have to change our conversation. We have to change the way we look at each other as human beings and as fellow citizens. There's no single policy, but we have to have an equity lens through which we look at every policy, and we haven't instituted that. We have an equity lens through our entire education system. We need that for economic development. We need that for the way we view social justice in the environment.
Representative Richardson.
The governor forgets to mention that this is his third term, that he's been involved in leading our state for almost 30 years when you take the time in the legislature and in the Senate. We don't have the racial issues that we have to address are issues of poverty. They're issues of education. We have high unemployment. It's his third term, and he's been overseeing a government where we have higher than the national average and have since the end of his first year of his term. When he took over as governor in 1995 and 96, Oregon was 22nd in the nation in GDP for income. Now we're 33rd. We had a much better education system, and he came on as the Oregon's education governor. He brings in Rudy Crew. That didn't work, and after a scandal, and he leaves under that cloud, he brings in an equally qualified PhD woman and pays her a fraction of what he pays Rudy, and now he's promoting Common Core. Common Core is not a solution to the problems that we have of racial inequality. And it's not just about racial, it's about poverty.
I'm trying to get the specific answers to this question about gentrification. Is that a governor's concern? Here we're talking about Portland, you could talk about other cities. And if so, what would the governor's role be to address it?
The issue...
No, so, from
please.
Representative.
No, you had your chance to dance around it, now I have to dance around it. Because...
Welcome to the big stage.
It is not an easy issue. If it was easy to solve, it would be. Because you have property rights, and you have the natural tendency for people that have done well to want to improve that, but it drives out those that have been living in an area that they could afford. It drives up
So let's talk about one specific policy that some people have pushed for. It would be to get rid of the state's ban on inclusionary zoning, which says cities cannot require affordable housing to be a part of new developments. Texas, as I understand it, is the only other state that has this ban. Would you sign a bill, Representative Richardson, to get rid of that ban?
First of all, a bill would have to come to me from the House and the Senate, and I can't answer whether I'd sign it or not sign it because I haven't seen the bill, and I'm not going to just make that kind of statement without a further understanding of all of the consequences. I also want to know where this has worked. We ought to be able to see where the changes to help affect Portland are being made in other cities and learn from those experiences, because this is something that has to be addressed. But the basic heart of the issue is poverty. It's high unemployment, it's poor education, and those things need to be improved for us to lessen the impact of gentrification, because it's a difference between those that have and those that don't have.
Governor Kitzhaber, on inclusionary zoning.
Yes, I would definitely sign the bill. Affordable housing is a key element of moving people out of poverty. So the answer to that is an unequivocal yes. I don't need to see the bill. It's the concept and the principle. I would also say that addressing racial inequities is a matter of values. And I think this is a place where we have just a gulf of difference between the two of us. My opponent voted against tuition equity. My opponent did not support the driver's card bill. My opponent voted against legislation that actually would have helped us begin to reduce the disproportionate number of minorities in our criminal justice system. So this is an issue of values, and specifically affordable housing and getting rid of that provision is a part of the solution, yes.
Representative Richardson, your response.
There he goes again, trying to attack votes on a bill as if a bill had one clause on it. Every bill needs to be evaluated on its own merits. I strongly support equal, for instance, pay equity. He talks about it. I don't just talk about it. I will do something about it. He has a task force saying we need to study equality in pay. My kids, my 8 daughters, don't tell me I need to have a task force. We know what it means if the governor's office is paying 79 cents for women for every dollar he pays for a man. We know what it means when the state averages are better for women's pay than the governor's own office. We need to address each of these issues and not go back and say he voted on a bill when there's many aspects to a bill that would determine whether or not you support it or you don't support it.
Governor, I want to give you a chance to respond to that, but
Yes,
I want to
please.
just get first some specifics about this issue, because we got a comment on our site from Andrea Paluzzo, who said, I've heard both candidates support equal pay for equal work. She put that in quotes, which is easy to say, but will take bold action to actually do. So I want to know what their support really means, given that Oregon women still earn 79 cents for every dollar men earn, and that mothers and women of color earn even less than that. I'd like to hear actual specifics about what they would do to reduce the wage gap. Representative Richardson first.
Happy to start out. It all starts with your hiring process. You hire and you be cautious as you're hiring to make sure that you have equal representation at all levels. The difference in pay is because you end up hiring women for less qualified and less paid jobs.
Just to be clear,
than
are you're talking about your own hiring practices or a mandate for corporations in the state?
I'm talking about setting the example in the governor's office. The 79 cents really refers to the governor's office. It's different statewide.
But I think this question, in the larger sense, is getting to a statewide imbalance. It's important if one of you two gentlemen becomes the next governor, we care how many, the couple dozen people you're hiring, but the bigger question is thousands of people in the state. How do you address that inequity?
A couple of ways. One, you set the example. The governor's office needs to set the example, and then the state that the governor is over needs to set that example for private enterprise. I do not believe that it's appropriate to start having a whole new affirmative action plan to force people to evaluate women versus men, because it hasn't worked very well in the racial area, and now we need to ensure that we do that which will work. We need education opportunities for women so that they can have the qualifications to do the same things that the men are doing, so that you can have equal hiring opportunities for men and women. So it's a factor of your hiring process, your pay process, and the education for
But in
training.
short, leading by example. Governor Kitzhaber.
Yeah, first let me speak on pay equity in my office, and then I'll try to address some specifics. First of all, if the allegation is that in my office we don't pay equal pay for equal work, it is categorically untrue. Even the reporter who wrote the article in the Statesman Journal, which apparently gave Mr. Richardson a rediscovered zeal for pay equity, has refuted the way he's used the numbers. We pay an executive policy person who is a man and a woman exactly the same. We pay an administrative support person who is a man and a woman exactly the same. Are there pay inequities statewide? Absolutely. I just think it's a little bit interesting that after 11 years in the legislature, Mr. Richardson, the champion of pay equity,
He gave you a chance. Please let him speak.
Didn't introduce a single bill to change pay equity, did introduce 10 bills to limit a woman's right to choice. So I think it's a little hypocritical that we suddenly discovered women's rights on the eve of the election. Specifics?
Specifics.
One of the reasons that we have the pay equity is the way we treat poor women, and particularly single moms. And as you go up the income scale, you begin to lose benefits like employment-related daycare. So someone moving from $9 an hour to $11 an hour has a marginal effective tax rate of about 160%. So one of the things we have to do is get rid of what I call the benefit cliff. Make sure that if you get an extra dollar in your paycheck, you actually have more money in your pocket. We also need to bump up employment-related daycare, and we need to increase the earned income tax credit. So those are a couple of specific things that I think will have a huge impact on beginning to address pay equity. Now, I have directed my Chief Operating Officer Mike Jordan to do a review. We asked this last June or July, before this became an issue, to look statewide, because there is a disparity in state government and in the private sector, to see if there are things we can do at the state through executive order or legislation to address the pay equity issue within state government.
If you're just tuning in, I want to remind folks you're listening to a special edition of Think Out Loud in partnership with the City Club of Portland. We're bringing you a conversation with the two most prominent candidates for governor, Republican State Representative Dennis Richardson and Democratic incumbent John Kitzhaber.
Now, before you go any further, because there's been an accusation against me as an individual, the governor's been governor for 3 terms. The one thing that he is equal on is that our entire economy has gone down. Women and men both are making less when you adjust for inflation than they were when he started. But I hire women and I hire men, and the women in my office presently get paid more than the men. When I was an attorney, the women and the men got paid equally. When I work as the governor, assuming that the voters will allow me to have that opportunity, we will hire men and women for the same positions and ensure that they get paid the same.
I want to turn to a different kind of equity. Because of measures 5, 47, and 50, the property taxes for 2 homes that are worth the same exact amount could vary by a factor of 5, in some cases I think even more than that. Would you support any changes to the property tax system that would bring tax assessments closer to real market value as opposed to what the homes were worth in 1995? Representative Richardson first.
Well, this addresses a real problem, and that is that local government, had been funded historically through property taxes, the limitations that we have mean that the revenue from property taxes is not keeping up with the increasing costs, to run the government. I would support those changes that, after having full hearings with the state in the House and the Senate, would come to me. I think that the governor should rarely veto a bill when the representatives of the people have gone through, have evaluated what is appropriate, and they pass a measure.
Would you champion a bill? You're talking there about weighing in after it's been vetted and passed by the legislature. Would this be an issue important enough for you to actually use the bully pulpit for?
It would depend on what the proposal was. And the answer is, I'm fine with using the governor's position to promote changes that are appropriate, but we have things that are so much more vital to the people throughout our state, like changing the economy, in removing the barriers that prevent us from growing. We need jobs. We need to have a governor who will be the ambassador for Oregon businesses to other countries. And I've done that as a legislator. I've organized 10 trips to China, and I've been there. I've created jobs for Oregon. I understand how we do that. And so the governor can be asked to be a champion over 1,000 different issues, but he's going to have to choose what are the top priorities, and for me it's going to be jobs in the economy and changing our education system so that our kids don't get Common Core, but get a world-class education, which is what they deserve.
Governor Kitzhaber, on this question of property tax reform.
Yes, I will actually answer it. Measure 5 and Measure 50 created an unintended consequence. We call it compression. But basically, many cities in this state, their population is growing faster than their ability to fund the basic infrastructure that's necessary for public safety, that's necessary for water and sewer systems, which is what you have to have if you want to grow jobs and take care of your people. So I would support 3 things. And let's understand, these are constitutional amendments and will be very, very difficult to pass. First, I think, and it's also created inequity. So you have 2 pieces of property that essentially look the same, but are pay completely different property taxes because of their value. So one, reassess the value of property at the time of sale to its current market value. I think it's important also to have existing and new property assessed the same way. And then the third one is allow, with the vote of the people, a city to operate a temporary levy outside compression for critical services. You're seeing this play out in a couple counties in southern Oregon where there's essentially Josephine County, no law enforcement. No law enforcement. We're using the state police as a backup. They don't respond or even arrest people unless it's a Measure 11 crime because they can't prosecute them. So this is a very, very serious issue. It's not just about property taxes. It's about how you provide basic human resource and public safety services at the local level, and actually how you allow cities to provide the infrastructure necessary to grow. And most people in Oregon live in cities, so this is not a minor issue. I would champion it and do all I could to try to make those changes.
We need to make sure that we don't get kind of buried in the rhetoric. When you talk about what's going on in Josephine County, understand the reason that we don't have law enforcement down there is that the governor hasn't championed the opening up of our forests. You have southern and rural counties that depend on natural resources, and they've been in a state of depression since the 1990s when the governor took over. We cannot allow that to happen. It's been estimated 40,000 timber jobs have been lost. We've lost somewhere between 150 and 200 mills. And the governor comes back and says, we kept a mill open in Southern Oregon and one in John Day. Well, what about the other 150 mills that have been shut down? We have areas of our state that are under constant and continual depression because of the lack of advocacy. And now we have the LNG plant opportunity on the coast, which could revitalize the whole coast. This is a $7.5 billion investment, and Senator Wyden and Congressman DeFazio are in support of it. We need it for revitalization of that economy. So not only have you overseen the destruction of the utilization of our forests, now you won't even help. You sit on your hands and won't support this LNG project, which would revitalize the whole coastal area.
Governor, I'll give you a chance to respond to all that. But just briefly, Representative Richardson, is it your contention that the future economic vitality of Southern Oregon is dependent on timber, that if you, as you say, open up the forests, Southern Oregon will thrive once again?
Every state and every community has assets, and those are the things that generate wealth. Southern Oregon is like all of Oregon, and we have timber as part of it's our heritage. We have more forest land today than we did 100 years ago. But the problem is we're watching it go up in flame and smoke because we don't have a rational plan to manage our natural resources.
All right, Governor,
so
there's timber policy and LNG on the table now for you.
All right. So there's no question that the impact of the ONC lands is a factor, as Dennis says. But we also remember that Josephine County has one of the lowest property tax rates in the state. And so there is a local effort that does need to be made by the citizens there, which isn't happening. Interestingly enough, this very afternoon, I will be on a conference call with Senator Wyden and Congressman DeFazio on the ONC bill that's trying to move through Congress to hopefully be marked up on November 17th and address this. So that is direct action that we've been working on for months, and hopefully we'll have a bill. That is a partial solution. The second solution involves the recognition that we do need to make wood products a sunrise industry, but it's not going to look like it did in 1979 or 1982. On the east side of the mountains, we have created a new business model with a 10-year stewardship agreement for lumber that's kept the mill in John Day open. I think we added 50 or 60 new jobs at the Oyster Cascade Mill, and essentially it's a collaborative process trying to utilize every portion of the wood and be able to get that wood locally rather than having to drive all the way to Canada to get it. On the west side, it's much more complicated because these are a different kind of forest, and I think part of the answer is changing the whole process by which the U.S. Forest Service manages these assets. It's very process-oriented, it's very cumbersome, and it needs to be redesigned. And I'm the incoming chair of the Western Governors Association, and my priority for the next year will be to essentially, we call it renewal of the Federal Forest Service approach to land management. On the LNG plant, I met with the CEO of the company about 2 weeks ago. We are coordinating the multiple permits that have to be lined up in order for this plant to go forward. I have not opposed the plant. I will tell you I have some real concerns about natural gas, and they are as follows. Natural gas can be an important bridge fuel to a lower carbon future if we can address the issue of methane leakage at the point of production and transportation, which is a very potent greenhouse gas, and if the export of LNG is used to displace dirtier forms of fuel. If you could address the fracking issue and the water pollution that goes with it, I think there's some promise there. So I had
How could you do that if you were talking about whether or not to actually approve the creation of an LNG plant? How much control would you have as governor over all the other fuels that aren't being used because of that LNG?
So the governor actually has limited authority, unlike the governor of Washington, to address commodity-specific sources of energy. As you know, I oppose the export of coal. I wasn't the decision maker in that. Washington State has sort of a mini NEPA where Governor Inslee has a much broader range. But I will say that we are working with some of the utilities and some conservation groups to try to figure out how you can get transparency in the supply chain. That is, how you can track a BTU of natural gas from wellhead to combustion. If you can do that, and if the West Coast is aligned, which together is the 7th largest economy in the world, we could pay a premium for clean natural gas that's produced and transported in ways that are not harmful to the environment.
This is a vital distinction between the two of us. The governor's got a philosophy that we can only let certain things happen if it meets with his criteria. The LNG export plant, I mean, liquid natural gas is something that we utilize and that the whole world wants. Coal is something that the world utilizes, and we could have 3,000 jobs if we merely allowed our reasonable approach to make sure that it's environmentally sound to put on barges coal that would go from the Port of Morro down to the Port of St. Helens. That would be a $242 million investment, 3,000 jobs, many of them union jobs, and over $800,000 a year to local school districts. And we're not going to do it because the governor says, I don't want Asian people to burn coal. Yes, I've been to China and I've seen women out there trying to wash their clothes on rocks. If they have greater electricity, which is coal-driven, they can keep their kids warm, they can cook food, and they can have the opportunity and time to get a better education for them and their kids. But he says, no, that's a 19th century commodity, the coal is, and so what he's going to do is force those that depend on coal to go to an 18th century lifestyle. They're going to get the coal either way. Why wouldn't it make sense for Oregon to get the jobs, get the prosperity, and ensure that coal is handled in an environmentally sound way? We have a great difference between us.
I'd love your answer, and I think perhaps this question can add another exclamation point on it, or another question mark. Mary Vogel says, considering the fact that climate change is hurting the poorest sectors of society, both locally and globally, the worst, what further strategies would you like to see Oregon undertake to address climate change equitably? Governor Kitzhaber first.
So in December 2012, we issued the Oregon 10-Year Energy Action Plan, which lays out a specific set of policies to address greenhouse gas emission in the built environment, in the transportation sector, and in the energy production sector, and we are moving intentionally forward to implement that. Last October, I joined Governor Jerry Brown and Governor Jay Inslee of Washington, as well as Premier Christy Clark of British Columbia, to sign an historic document called the West Coast Energy Action and Climate Plan. And essentially, it seeks to align climate and energy policies from British Columbia to Baja California, and then use this huge market to accelerate the transition to a sustainable, clean economy. Now, to be doing that, to have the Environmental Protection Agency having just issued what's called the 111D rule that speaks to how we reduce carbon in the power production sector, to be trying to reduce our carbon while exporting coal to Asia makes no sense on three levels. It makes no sense as a policy, as a governor. It makes no sense to be trying to reduce emissions here and subsidize coal in China. It doesn't make sense as a doctor because the jet stream, let's remind, comes from China back. And we get the pollutants, we get the mercury blowing right back into our backyard. And it doesn't make any sense as a father, because I want my son to be able to take a clean breath of air when he turns 30.
All right. So as a lawyer, as a father, and as a potential governor, Representative Richardson.
I'm glad that you love your son, and I love my daughters and my son.
I'm sure you do.
It's not about anybody wanting to hurt the environment. It's about looking at real science and not just a philosophical viewpoint. Your point is, I think that we shouldn't promote this in any way, even though they're going to get it from someone. I mean, we're not going to stop this from being done. It's just going to be put on a train and taken maybe to British Columbia, where you burn more carbon getting it there than you would if we transported it here. The people are going to get the coal. But it's about our economy as well. There needs to be a balance. We're not going to change the world by having the philosophy that the governor is promoting just in Oregon.
Then how are you? And what role does the Oregon governor have? Because if I hear you correctly, in a sense you're saying it's going to happen anyway, we might as well get a few bucks from this.
No, not exactly. What I'm saying is that there are thousands of jobs that will help our economy if we promote the LNG exports in Coos Bay and we, in an environmentally sound way, transport coal that they're going to get either way. So we can either make sure that it's done in an environmentally sound and in a responsible way, or we can just let it go someplace else and say we did our part.
And just so I understand, when you say environmentally sound, you're talking about literally the transport of these fossil fuels, not the burning. Do you think that we should be encouraging the burning of more fossil fuels at all?
I think that we should be encouraging the utilization of the resources that we have, and that we can talk all we want about having wave energy and sun and solar, and while it's great that we experiment, we want to promote that, the reality is we're using electricity that for the most part is being generated with fossil fuels. We also have in Oregon hydroelectric power, but the governor and his other leaders have supported not including hydroelectric power as part of a renewable alternative resource. It's about promoting a brand of philosophy. And of course, we're talking also about what advice is he getting and where is it coming from that says that we should do certain things that benefit some companies at the expense of other companies. I believe that we need to work with what we've got, that the federal standards that we have ought to be looked at, and that we do not get ahead of the reality of the world in which we live.
I think that the positions are clear. Let's move on to education. A legislative report last year found that the goal of getting all students to graduate from high school by 2025, which is the cornerstone of the 40-40-20 goal, is within reach, but the report said that there's a great deal of uncertainty as to whether it can happen without a major increase in funding. Just to be clear, this is to fully phase in the quality education model. It would mean almost doubling K-12 spending between now and the 2021-23 biennium. Where would that money come from? Representative Richardson first.
Well, first of all, the premise is not correct. We do not define success in education, at least we shouldn't, by how much money you throw at the problem.
No,
it's about the outcomes.
This version of success was 100% graduation rate.
Yeah. We are going down, not up. When 40-40-20 came out, the idea is we would have 100% graduation by 2025. So how is that working? We're now next to last in graduation rates. Nearly a third of our students aren't graduating with their classmates. This is 2014. This is unacceptable. It's abysmal. We've talked about the minorities. Minorities in Oregon, many of them, it's like half, 50% graduation rate or a little bit above that. That's unacceptable. And so while we talk about how we're going to double the cost and where that money is going to come from, maybe we ought to deal with the reality that there are school districts in Oregon and across the country that are able to produce almost 100% graduation rate and do it with money that they have presently. The solution is not money, although I believe we should pay our good teachers better and bad teachers should find another place to work. But I believe that it's more than just trying to define it in terms of dollars. It's about what are the outcomes that you want? Where are they getting those outcomes? And what can Oregon do to reform our system so that we can also have similar success?
So, but what are the policies you'd push for to achieve that?
Oh, a number of them that immediately come to mind. One is we're not going to define success by having our kids be another source of a federal experiment like the Common Core. Common Core sounds great in the mission statement when we're going to try and provide, prepare our kids for college or for careers, but the devil's in the details. And what we're doing with Common Core now, once you finally start seeing the curriculum, we have teachers that are quitting teaching because they said, I can no longer teach. There is no input that's being given to these goals by teachers, by parents, and local school boards who know their kids best. It's another federal program that promises money to us, and so we institute it at the expense of our kids. So we stop that. We focus on those things for school districts in Oregon that are getting high graduation rates. One of them is they want to ensure that every child has a mentor and an opportunity, especially with the breakdown in the family in some of the areas of our state where it's so severe. A child that's growing up shouldn't be bound in the cycle of poverty because he has no way out or she has no example. And so we need to remove barriers that prevent citizens in every community, and big cities are made up of small communities. Every community, they want to help. And so every child should have someone who has an interest that's similar to a child, so that everyone has somebody that they can look to outside of their family to help them have a vision for something that they can do. 100% of our focus is on college. Less than 25% of the kids actually show up. What about the other 75%? Where are the trades? Where are the shop classes that used to be there? What about music and art and professional training? We need to make sure that every student has an opportunity that meets their needs and not continue to try and force students into some kind of a mold that is decided in Salem or in Washington, D.C.
Governor, one more second that I want to hear from you.
Okay.
Representative, as you talk about music and art and shop classes and trades, I mean, I think that is one place where extra money would have to be put in. The schools aren't getting rid of them because they don't like music. It's because often they simply don't have the money, and so they put it towards math or science or English instead.
Right.
Do you think that more money should go towards K-12 education?
Yes, I do, and I think that it will happen if we make it a priority and we fund it that way. I've been in the legislature for 11 years, except for the one time that I was co-chair of Ways and Means and required that we fund education first. It's almost always one of the last bills in the session. And why? Because you can fund everything else, and then you get down to education, there's not enough money, and you can say, oh, we've got to have more taxes because we don't have enough money for the kids. It's for the kids. And Republicans hate children and seniors and other things. I mean, that is the political mantra that keeps coming on. What we really need to do is fund education first and assure that those things that are top priorities, that they get funded first and not held last as a political ploy.
Governor Kitzhaber.
Wow. So there's a number of things I'd like to touch on. I'll try to do it quickly. Common Core is a set of standards, and it recognizes the fact that kids from Oregon high schools are not going to be competing for jobs just with kids from Oregon. They're going to be competing with kids all over the country and all over the world. So the Common Core standards themselves, we already have standards. That's not the issue. The issue, and the issue that concerns the education community, is how you implement it. And I've been working with a group of teachers led by the OEA to develop a model assessment on how you actually can measure a child's progress towards those standards. Yesterday, we got a waiver from the U.S. Department of Education to delay implementing the assessments based on scores to give us an opportunity to actually move forward on the Common Core standards. So I think it's very, very important to understand that we're in a global economy now. Secondly, I was around when we did the quality education model with the late Lynn Lundquist, God bless him, and the Education Act of the 21st Century. And what I've learned is that to move those numbers, you have to have a long-term investment strategy that you're willing to do year in and year out that puts money at those places that gets the biggest leverage in terms of student outcomes. The reason we're focusing on early learning, kindergarten readiness, full-day kindergarten, and reading at third grade is that kids who are reading at level in the third grade are 4 times more likely to graduate from high school than kids who aren't. That is an attainable goal within 5 years. That's by prioritizing resources there. We know that kids who have 6 high school credits in 9th grade are much more likely to graduate. Secondly, in the next budget, we will be prioritizing reconnecting kids to the world of work through career and technical education, STEM, and computer programming. We want to have 26 schools, I think, that actually teach computer science, but that is where a lot of the jobs are going to be. We've also then moved to independent boards for post-secondary education, which we believe will help not only bring private resources into our post-secondary schools, but also align the missions of those universities to prioritize access for Oregon undergraduates. In terms of resources, we do need more money in education, and we're going to get some of it through the changes we made in healthcare. With the Medicaid, with 1 million people now in the Medicaid program, and state employees in the same care model, and we intend to bring school teachers into that model next year, we will save just over $4 billion general fund by the 21-23 biennium. That means by 2019, with 2 caveats, the economy doesn't collapse and the kicker doesn't kick, we will be able to eliminate the structural budget deficit that we've had since ballot measure 5 and have a structurally balanced budget in 2019 and a structural surplus beyond that. We do need additional resources. So one of the challenges is looking at our tax code and finding out not only how to make it more equitable and more aligned with the business opportunities we want to capitalize on, but also see if additional funding is there for those specific targeted investments. If we just pour money into the black box that's the state school fund, I don't think you solve the problem. So you have to unbundle that a little bit. And I got to say that just funding schools first doesn't change anything. If you fund schools first, you then maybe shortchange things like earned income tax credit, employment-related daycare, support for struggling families that are also enormously important for a kid to actually take advantage of the legislative, of the school system. So I will just say in conclusion that funding schools first and getting rid of Common Core, to me, does not constitute a thoughtful long-term education policy.
But we do need to mention that you brought up Century 21. You're not just running for governor for the first time. You back Century 21. Remember Sim and Cam? How many millions of dollars did we spend on that fiasco? This isn't your first time at the rodeo. You're saying we need to do something better for Oregon. Well, guess what? You've had 3 terms to do it, Governor, and we're next to last in graduation rates. We're the highest in the nation in absenteeism, and every time we get a report on achievement, it's going down. We need to move that arrow up and not down. I will move it up. We've got to continue.
But you have
Governor, on that point, because it's one that the representative has made a few times, and I think it's fair to say that's one of the centerpieces of your campaign, Representative Richardson, is as a referendum on the governor's terms, this term and the previous 2. How much of what's good and bad about the state right now do you personally take responsibility for? And you have, I'm sorry to say, a minute for that answer.
Well, certainly we attempted to make some changes with the Education Act for the 21st century, and the subsequent legislatures did not continue to fund it. So what's become clear to me, and reason really why I ran in 2010, is whether you're talking about unemployment statistics or graduation rates, you have to have a long-term, sustainable investment plan that you have to, and that's why we set the 40-40-20 goals. It's the goal, that's the aspiration, and we walk back from that. We've done achievement compacts. We're trying to align our school districts, our community colleges, and our universities around that long-term investment strategy. That's what's been missing, and that's what we have in place today.
Just briefly, so you're saying that what things that aren't working well right now in the state, you lay the blame at the legislature for not funding them.
I don't lay the blame at the legislature. It's simply a fact that they didn't fund them, and who knows what will happen if Representative Richardson is elected or whoever's elected in 2018. All I'm saying is that unless we have the will to continue to put money in those areas in our educational continuum, particularly on the front end, which deals with a lot of the racial inequities, by the way, we're not going to get there.
Well, we flipped a coin earlier, and Governor Kitzhaber, you will be giving the first closing statement.
This race is about 2 things. It's about values, and it's about the ability to deliver. And on values, they matter, and my opponent and I differ dramatically on those values that I think are critical to our state's future. We differ on the importance of ensuring that men and women have a strong voice in the workplace. We differ on the fundamental issue of a woman's right to control her own reproductive health choices. We differ on whether or not Oregonians should be able to marry the person they love. We differ on the importance of embracing our growing diversity through tuition equity and welcoming immigrant children. And we differ on the importance of protecting Oregon's environment as the foundation of our identity and of our economy. This state is a vastly better place today than it was 4 years ago, when we were highly polarized, facing high unemployment, a huge budget deficit, and a divided legislature. And the fact that that did not lead to the kind of political meltdown we saw in Wisconsin speaks to the change in the tone at the top, and it speaks to the ability and leadership willing to fight for and deliver for the state of Oregon. We came together as Oregonians and found solutions to some very, very difficult problems. We erased the budget deficit and balanced the books. We set out to create 25,000 new jobs a year, and we have exceeded that goal. Across the state, communities are coming together around outcomes for children, kindergarten readiness, 3rd grade reading. We've added over $1 billion to the K-12 system, added full-time kindergarten, and instituted the first tuition freeze in 14 years. And today, 95% of all Oregonians have health insurance coverage, tens of thousands of them for the very, very first time. When I was inaugurated in 2011, I said that somewhere in America, a state needs to be able to demonstrate that we can weather our most difficult challenges without losing our commitment to one another, without losing our sense of community, and emerge stronger and more united than we were before. That is exactly what we've done here in our state. We together have brought our state back. We have delivered for the state of Oregon. This race is about 2 things. It's about values, and it's about the ability to deliver. And the choice is very clear. I'm John Kitzhaber. I am proud to be your governor, and I ask for your vote on November 4th.
Representative Richardson.
Thank you. The governor wants a 4th term, but he hasn't earned it. Oregon's unemployment continues to rise, our education system continues to fail, and the governor's campaign consultant, Patricia McCaig, and others have shown that we do not have a trust and an ethics that is important for our governor. We have the problems with Patricia McCaig, who worked for a contractor and got $550,000 while she's an advisor to the governor. We have Sylvia Hayes, who is a senior advisor to the governor, and now she and the governor are under issues of suspect that they're going to have to prove relating to whether or not there's been a shocking pay-to-play scandal. The governor's staff is subject to at least 2 federal investigations over Cover Oregon scandal, which, by the way, is burned through $300 million. Then he pays hush money, $67,000, for a promise of an ex-employee not to say anything bad about Cover Oregon or about him, especially during this campaign. The real question here is the governor's accountability. It's over the single most inept and unethical administration in the history of the state of Oregon. Oregon deserves better. And the question remains, of course, is what else are we going to find out? What is still hidden? Oregon voters, enough is enough. Oregon deserves a governor who will reboot our budget and our economy and create jobs, who will reform education in a way where we learn from what's working elsewhere in Oregon and around, and we have a world-class education, and we restore trust, accountability, and efficiency to the governor's office. I will do those things. I commit to it. If I don't make Oregon a better place in our economy and turn it upright and upwise and move that arrow upward within one term, I won't run for another term. I'm here to perform, not to be an aristocrat. We have the opportunity. Let's vote for the change that we deserve. I'm Dennis Richardson. I would appreciate your support and your vote.
Representative Richardson and Governor Kitzhaber, thanks very much for a civil and substantive debate. Thank you. Thanks as well to our audience here at the Sentinel Hotel, our colleagues at JPR and KLCC, and our partner, the City Club of Portland. I also want to thank the City Club's sponsors, AARP, Barron Liebman, Iberdrola Renewables, Perkins Coie, Portland General Electric, and Providence Health and Services. I should add that this hour is part of a whole series of conversations we've been having in the lead up to the November election. A week from today, we'll sit down with the 4 minor party candidates for governor. That will be also on KLCC and JPR. You can find segments about the highest profile ballot measures and our conversations with Jeff Merkley and Monica Webby on our website, opb.org/thinkoutloud. I am Dave Miller. Have a great weekend. Well.